I was a junior curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London when I saw my first Alexander McQueen runway presentation in the fall of 1998. It was McQueen's 13th collection, and rallying against superstition, he called it, quite simply, number 13. I had to beg the press officer at McQueen for a ticket, and I must have called at least a dozen times. Finally, she caved in and gave me a standing-only ticket. I've been a huge admirer of McQueen's work ever since he sent a dress made of locusts down the runway during his first catwalk performance. McQueen was famous for his highly theatrical and highly fantastical runway presentations that were more suggestive of installation and avant-garde performance art. One show was staged as a snowstorm in a huge snow globe and featured models on ice skates. And another was staged on a catwalk that looked like solidified lava and ended with a model surrounding by flames. Another ended with models drenched with water as they walked down the runway, and McQueen lit the water with yellow light to give the illusion of a golden shower, the so-called money shot of pornography. But nothing prepared me for the emotional intensity and sublime, almost transcendent beauty of McQueen's number 13 collection. It was held in the former Gainsborough Studios in East London, which is best remembered for the cinematic melodramas it created in the 1940s. At the time, the studios must have been quite grand, but in the fall of 1998, they were rather run down, almost dystopian. The set also mirrored the sort of raw, uninviting studios, and it consisted of a rectangular platform made out of raw, untreated planks of wood. And suspended above the platform was a light box with harsh fluorescent lighting that mirrored the dimensions of the platform. As the show started, the light box was dimmed, and out walked a model in a black frock coat and what looked like a pair of brown wooden boots. When she reached the end of the runway and the light box brightened, you realized that the model was the Paralympics champion, Amy Mullins. And what seemed like leather boots were actually a pair of hand-carved wooden prosthetic legs made out of solid ash. Amy was born without shin bones and had her legs amputated from below the knee at the age of 1. The legs were designed by McQueen, and they were based after the wood carvings by Grinling Gibbons. Leading up to the show, McQueen had been a guest editor on the magazine Dazed and Confused, in which he art directed a shoot that featured Amy and seven other men and women with physical disabilities. McQueen always railed against normative conventions of beauty. For him, the body was a site of contravention, where normality was questioned and where marginality was both embraced and celebrated. The start of the show was both poetic and poignant, but the finale quite literally took your breath away. Onto the stage walked the model Shalom Harlow in a white dress that was belted under the arms. She stopped halfway down the runway and took her place on a turntable. And as she began to slowly rotate like a music box doll, 2 menacing industrial paint sprayers came to life on the runway and began to spray her dress with black and acid green paint. The image was at once beautiful and violent, compelling and disturbing. I later found out that it was the only runway presentation that made McQueen cry. I left the show almost in a state of shock, and it was a feeling I would experience repeatedly after attending subsequent McQueen presentations. McQueen was unique as a designer in his ability to make his audience react emotionally to his runway performances. McQueen himself once remarked, "I don't want to do a cocktail party. I'd rather people left my shows and vomited." McQueen took his own life on the 11th of February 2010 at the age of 40. The following day, I approached the museum's director, Tom Campbell, about staging an exhibition honoring McQueen. Initially, Tom thought the idea was a little ghoulish and also premature, but I felt very strongly in the immediacy of the exhibition. At the time of McQueen's death, no one really knew what would happen to his archive in London, or indeed his atelier. When I began working on the exhibition, the only thing I was certain about was I wanted people to experience the same powerful, visceral emotions that I felt when I attended my first McQueen runway performance. It was never my intention to present a comprehensive retrospective on McQueen. Practically speaking, I didn't have the time. I had exactly 10 months to pull the exhibition together. So I approached the exhibition more as an essay or a short story, and I saw the show as the first of many that might be done on McQueen. During his life, McQueen surrounded himself with a very loyal and close-knit team of co-workers, and I felt very strongly that the exhibition would benefit greatly from their direct participation. I felt that the rawness and freshness of their memories would enhance both the integrity and the authenticity of the exhibition. Over time, the work of every artist is subject to some sort of revisionism, and I wanted to avoid this as much as possible by tapping into the raw memories of the designer. McQueen's colleagues had always been deeply protective over him, and after his suicide, their loyalty intensified. Very few gave interviews. Actually, the one person who did was McQueen's former boyfriend, George Forsyth. And with the money he received from the interview, he went on a vacation to South America. And while he was there, he was bitten by a spider and died. And McQueen's colleagues came to see this as a very cautionary tale. I never met any of McQueen's colleagues before, and when I started working on the exhibition, they were understandably very guarded. To them, I was a stranger, an outsider. Over the months, I slowly earned their respect and their confidence, and I think my outsider status helped them confide in me. After McQueen's death, many people, mainly journalists, wanted to own McQueen's life and indeed his death. And I had no such agenda. I wasn't competing to be the voice of McQueen or his official spokesperson. In a way, I was a blank canvas, a sort of neutral sounding board onto which they could project their thoughts and feelings about McQueen without any recall or any judgment. For many of McQueen's colleagues, the exhibition served as a means by which they could grieve or mourn their friend. For many, it became a sort of eulogy. During the exhibition, I got to know three of McQueen's closest colleagues, Sarah Burton, Trina Vicada, and Sam Gainsbury. And I came to refer to them as the Holy Trinity, as they became my closest allies on the exhibition. And it was through these women that I got to know and understand McQueen. I learned about his design process, his working methods, and his technical aptitude. I also learned about his inspirations, which were eclectic and at times random. Sarah once told me that McQueen based part of one collection on a green sweater by the character Joey in the TV sitcom Friends. It was Trina who taught me the most about McQueen, the man, as opposed to McQueen, the designer. She helped me understand his emotional intensity and his complexity. In the end, it was Trina who made me fall in love with McQueen. It's a myth that curators treat the subjects of their exhibitions with cold-hearted objectivity. Curators can't help but let their personal feelings and judgments creep into their exhibitions. And I'm the first one to admit that the exhibition was deeply, deeply subjective. I believe it was this subjectivity, though, that contributed to the success of the exhibition. And I'm not ashamed to admit that the show was, in many ways, an unapologetic love poem to McQueen. Before settling on the structure of the exhibition, I struggled with many false starts, from contextualizing McQueen's fashions within the world of contemporary art to linking them with the philosophical arguments of the French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss, and to presenting them chronologically, which tends to be the more usual approach when looking at the work of a single artist in a museum. It was through my conversation with Trina that I decided to structure the exhibition around the concept of the sublime and McQueen's deep engagement with Romanticism. The main reason for deciding against a chronological approach was ideological. Like many designers, McQueen's brilliance and originality was inconsistent. In truth, he produced some rather mediocre collections that a chronology would have emphasized. McQueen's strength as a designer lay in his conceptual provocations, which were most clearly revealed in his more theatrical, fantastical, and non-wearable pieces he designed for the runway. And focusing on these generated a consensus of opinion that McQueen was an artist and that his fashions were art. The works featured in the exhibition not only resonated with people on an artistic level, but also on an emotional level. McQueen had an almost shamanistic approach to materials. He favored materials that were almost fetishistic, like fur, leather, and feathers. And the dress that opened the exhibition was made entirely out of razor clams. And it's materials such as these that imbued McQueen's fashions with a strange, haunting, affecting presence that evoke feelings of both ambiguity and ambivalence in the visitors. There was a truth to McQueen's use of materials that seemed to reflect his own search for truth. For McQueen, no subject was off limits, no matter how personal or how painful. McQueen himself once said, "My shows aren't instead of a shrink, they're what come out of the sessions." And McQueen's shows were deeply and unapologetically autobiographical. And in the exhibition, I didn't include any biographical information because his life was laid bare for all to see in his fashions. And it was this exposure of the self, this vulnerability, that I think resonated most with visitors to the show. In total, the exhibition attracted 661,509 visitors over 3 months. To date, it's the museum's most popular fashion exhibition and the 8th most popular exhibition, the most popular being Treasures of Tutankhamun, which attracted 1.3 million in 1976. Critics often describe the exhibition as a blockbuster, which is a term I dislike intensely, as it seems to suggest some sort of Machiavellian intentionality on the part of the museum. In truth, the show's success came as a complete surprise to everyone, and you only need to look at how badly equipped we were in dealing with the crowds to show how unprepared we were. Scholars have written papers on the reasons of the show's success, naming factors such as the morbid appeal of McQueen's suicide. And for sure, McQueen's suicide did add to the pathos of the exhibition. But I firmly believe that it was the sublime beauty and emotional power of McQueen's fashions that determined the success of the exhibition. For many visitors, McQueen conformed to our ideal or archetype of the tragic, tortured artistic genius. And McQueen was a designer of unrivaled courage. He seemed to find creative freedom through his torments. And what you saw in the work was the man himself, warts and all. Ultimately, people make icons, and those 660,000 people made McQueen an icon. Many stood in line for over 5 hours to see the show. And the museum extended the exhibition for a week and made the unprecedented decision to keep the museum open till midnight on the final weekend. The show almost became a pilgrimage site. Many dressed for the exhibition. Some even created replicas of the fashions in the exhibition. One girl created a facsimile of the razor clam dress and substituting toilet paper instead of razor clams. And the queue took on a life of its own. One couple found love while waiting in line, while another quite dramatically broke up. After the show closed, I asked Sarah, Trina, and Sam what McQueen would have thought of the exhibition, and they all said exactly the same thing, that he would have been thrilled to have his name on a huge banner outside the museum, but furious that fewer people came to see his show than King Tut's. When I saw my last Alexander McQueen show in 2006, I was a fully-fledged curator at the Met. I still had to beg the press officer for a ticket, but I was given a seat this time. It was called Widows of Culloden, and it was one of McQueen's most autobiographical collections. The finale was a hologram of the model Kate Moss, and it filled me with the same sublime feelings of awe and wonder as the finale to number 13. Of the collection, McQueen said poignantly, "There's no way back for me now. I'm going to take you on journeys you never dreamed were possible." It's heartbreaking to think that McQueen produced only 7 more collections before his untimely death. But this comment, in a way, proved prophetic as we continue to be both astonished and inspired by McQueen's sweeping, unbridled imagination. This is his legacy, and this ultimately is what makes McQueen an icon.